Back in the old days when everybody worked for the newspaper, we had a lot of problems reproducing anything for that matter back in those days. But anything that was shot as a halftone, like a photograph or a wash drawing or continuous tone artwork of whatever kind, always had the problem of they couldn't drop out things to dead white. They would always have what they call a highlight dot, and if anybody ever seen the old black and white photography from newspapers years ago, they looked pretty bad because the highlights always were about 20% gray with these ugly dots in them. And conversely, you had a shadow dot in the black areas because they couldn't do black either. They did a lot of gray. So you went from about 20% on a good day to about 90% as far as your tonal range was concerned, as opposed to 0 to 100. So you were always doing masks, and I just did this to show how we did masks back in the old days. A mask would allow you to drop out the background to a dead white if that's what you wanted, and you would use this Amberlith product, which we used to use by the score, and it would peel off. You'd cut it out with an X-Acto knife, peel it off, and thus you would have a mask. Legions of people were occupied doing masks back in those days. The Amberlith people were everywhere. So, okay, now we had a process called fluorographic, the fluorographic process. And that was a breakthrough because to do color, you always had to do it as overlays because the newspaper couldn't separate color. So here's how, this is an example of a full color piece, quote, quote. It was actually done with overlays. Now the fluorographic process allowed us to work in color. So we had our red plate, our yellow plate, our blue plate. Blue was light on this particular piece. And that was very neat when I did these things. And I cut them all the same size, which makes them difficult to work with, but that's another issue. And the yellow plate. So now this also has a black and white wash on it, which gives us the tones of gray. Well, that's where we wouldn't be able to do that. Newspapers could reproduce black and white, but they couldn't do the grays very well. So we had the fluorographic process, which put fluorographic, we use a fluorographic liquid as opposed to water to do our wash drawings, and that would create a mask which the engraver could then use to drop out his background to a dead white. Let's get the light so you can see this. Okay, if you can see that. So this board has no fluorescent properties to it, as opposed to, say, paper that you see quite often today that glows under the fluorescent light. This doesn't, so that the engraver the camera would see this as black, dropped it and use it as used it as its own mask. So conversely, when they would shoot the color portion, they would then put a fluorescent material in the background, paper, and then the camera would see that as black and see that as black and see that as black, which may be a little bit confusing, but then when they put it on the press and printed the yellow plate, they printed yellow, red, blue, and black, and then they would combine to get the full color piece. And we can have the light again. Okay, and that's how the process worked back in the old days.